Marcus Kane had always been different, though it took him 25 years to understand exactly how. While his colleagues at the prestigious consulting firm spent their lunch breaks discussing weekend plans and office gossip, Marcus studied them like a scientist observing lab specimens. He noticed everything: the subtle shift in Sarah's voice when she spoke to their manager, the way David's confidence crumbled whenever the quarterly reports were mentioned, how Jennifer's laugh changed depending on who told the joke. The revelation came on a rainy Tuesday morning in downtown Chicago. Marcus sat in the glass-walled conference room, watching his team present their findings to the client. The presentation was failing miserably. His colleagues stumbled over words, their carefully prepared slides seeming to confuse rather than convince the stern-faced executives across the table. Marcus saw the exact moment when the client decided to terminate their contract, a barely perceptible tightening around the eyes, a slight lean backward in the chair. But Marcus also saw something else. An opportunity. "If I may interrupt," Marcus said, his voice cutting through the awkward silence that had settled over the room. His teammate Jennifer shot him a grateful look, mistaking his intervention for support. Marcus smiled at her, a warm, encouraging expression that masked his true intentions. For the next 20 minutes, Marcus systematically dismantled everything his team had presented, not through direct contradiction, but through subtle reframing. He acknowledged their valuable preliminary research while introducing additional perspectives that completely transformed the narrative. He watched as the client's body language shifted, leaning forward with renewed interest. By the end of his impromptu presentation, not only had he saved the contract, but he had positioned himself as the project's natural leader. As they left the building, Jennifer approached him with tears of gratitude. "Thank you so much, Marcus. I thought we were finished. You saved all our jobs." Marcus placed a comforting hand on her shoulder, his expression radiating sincerity. "We're a team, Jennifer. I couldn't let them overlook the brilliant work you've all done." The words felt strange in his mouth, not because they were lies, but because he felt nothing while saying them. No warmth, no genuine care, only the satisfaction of a chess player who had just executed a particularly elegant gambit. That evening, Marcus sat in his minimalist apartment, a glass of expensive scotch in hand, and, finally, admitted the truth to himself. He was not like the others. While they operated from emotion, impulse, and social conditioning, he saw the world as it truly was, a complex system of power dynamics where the strong consumed the weak, and the intelligent manipulated the naive. The realization should have disturbed him. Instead, it filled him with a strange sense of liberation. Marcus began to research, devouring books on psychology, negotiation, and influence. He studied the great strategists of history, from Sun Tzu to Machiavelli, from Carnegie to Cialdini. But, more importantly, he began to experiment on his colleagues, his friends, even his family, testing theories and refining techniques. He learned that people desperately wanted to be understood, so he became a master listener, asking the right questions and remembering crucial details that others forgot. He discovered that everyone had insecurities, dreams, and fears that could be leveraged. He found that timing was everything. The right suggestion at the moment of vulnerability could reshape someone's entire worldview. Within 6 months, Marcus had been promoted twice. His colleagues saw him as a natural leader, someone who truly cared about their success. His superiors viewed him as indispensable, a problem solver who could navigate the most delicate situations. His subordinates respected him, believing he genuinely had their best interests at heart. The truth was far more calculating. Marcus had identified each person's psychological profile and crafted a unique approach for managing them. For insecure Jennifer, he provided constant validation while gradually making her dependent on his approval. For ambitious David, he created controlled competition, always ensuring that David's wins served Marcus's larger objectives. For their manager, Rebecca, he positioned himself as the indispensable right hand, the person who could execute her vision better than she could articulate it herself. The breakthrough moment came during the annual performance reviews. Marcus had spent weeks preparing, not by polishing his own accomplishments, but by subtly positioning his colleagues' work to reflect poorly under scrutiny. He never sabotaged anyone directly; that would have been crude and detectable. Instead, he asked innocent questions that highlighted flaws, suggested improvements that revealed inadequacies, and offered to help with projects that were already struggling. When Rebecca called him into her office for his review, Marcus knew he had won before she spoke a word. Her body language radiated the satisfaction of someone who had found exactly what she was looking for. "Marcus, I'm going to be direct with you," Rebecca began, her tone serious but warm. "The executive committee has been watching your work and, frankly, we're impressed. Not just with your results, but with your leadership style. You have a gift for bringing out the best in people." Marcus nodded thoughtfully, as if considering this observation for the first time. "I appreciate that, Rebecca. I've always believed that individual success means nothing if the team doesn't succeed together." "Exactly. Which is why I'm recommending you for the senior consultant position. It comes with a 40% salary increase and your own team." Rebecca leaned forward conspiratorially. "Between you and me, there were other candidates, but none of them have your combination of strategic thinking and emotional intelligence." As Marcus left Rebecca's office, he felt the familiar surge of satisfaction that came with a well-executed plan reaching fruition. His colleagues would view this promotion as a triumph of merit and teamwork. They would never suspect that Marcus had orchestrated their comparative failures, that every conversation, every piece of advice, every moment of apparent support had been calculated to advance his position while limiting theirs. That night, Marcus stood on his apartment balcony, looking out over the city lights. Each illuminated window represented someone going about their predictable life, following social scripts and emotional impulses, never questioning the invisible forces that shaped their decisions. They were sheep, content to graze in fields defined by others, never realizing that the boundaries were arbitrary and the shepherds were often wolves in disguise. Marcus understood now that there were two types of people in the world: predators and prey. The predators recognized the game for what it was and played to win. The prey lived in comfortable illusions, believing in fairness, merit, and inherent goodness, never understanding that these concepts were tools used by the clever to control the naive. He thought about Machiavelli's famous observation that it was better to be feared than loved, but that the ideal was to be both feared and loved simultaneously. Marcus had discovered something even more powerful: the ability to be neither feared nor loved, but trusted. Trust was the ultimate currency in human relationships, and Marcus had learned to generate it artificially, to mint it like a counterfeiter, creating perfect replicas of genuine emotion. The next morning brought new challenges and opportunities. Marcus's promotion had created a power vacuum in his old department, and he watched with detached interest as his former peers began positioning themselves for advancement. They had no idea that Marcus still maintained influence over the selection process through his relationship with Rebecca, or that he had already decided who would succeed and who would be marginalized. Jennifer approached him during the lunch break, her face bright with hope and anxiety. "Marcus, I know you're in the senior role now, but I was wondering if you had any advice about applying for your old position." Marcus smiled warmly, placing his hand on her arm in a gesture of friendly support. "Jennifer, you're incredibly talented. The only thing holding you back is confidence." He paused, watching her face light up at the praise. "But I have to be honest with you as a friend, the competition is fierce. David has been positioning himself for this for months, and you know how political these decisions can get." He watched the doubt creep into her expression, the way her shoulders sagged slightly. "Perfect. But," Marcus continued, his voice taking on a confidential tone, "I think I know a way to help you stand out. Rebecca mentioned she's concerned about team morale in the transition. If you could put together a proposal for maintaining continuity and supporting the team through the change, that might be exactly what sets you apart." Jennifer's face brightened again. "That's brilliant, Marcus. You always know exactly what to do." As she walked away, energized by their conversation, Marcus allowed himself a small smile. The proposal Jennifer would create would indeed be brilliant, because Marcus would help her craft it, ensuring it contained exactly the elements he wanted Rebecca to see. More importantly, the time and energy Jennifer spent on this project would be time she wasn't spending on networking or showcasing her other qualifications. Meanwhile, Marcus had already had a private conversation with David about the importance of demonstrating strategic thinking over operational management. He had subtly guided David toward preparing a presentation that would position him as a visionary leader rather than a practical team manager, exactly the opposite of what Rebecca was actually seeking in the role. The game was intricate and beautiful in its complexity. Each move served multiple purposes, each conversation advanced several agendas simultaneously. Marcus was not simply competing with his former colleagues, he was orchestrating the entire competition from behind the scenes, ensuring that whoever won would be someone he could easily influence and control. 3 weeks later, the decision was announced. Jennifer got the promotion, just as Marcus had planned. She was competent enough to do the job well, insecure enough to remain dependent on his guidance, and grateful enough to never question his motives. During the congratulatory drinks after work, she pulled Marcus aside. "I can never thank you enough," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Your advice about the continuity proposal, that's what clinched it for Rebecca. You could have applied for this position yourself and won easily, but instead you helped me succeed. I don't know many people who would do that." Marcus accepted her gratitude with humble grace, deflecting credit while internally cataloging this moment as another investment in long-term influence. Jennifer now owed him a significant debt, one that would compound with interest over time. She would seek his advice on major decisions, include him in confidential discussions, and advocate for his interests without ever realizing she was doing so. But the true artistry of Marcus's approach lay not in these individual victories, but in the broader system he was constructing. Each person he influenced became a node in an expanding network of obligation and dependency. They made decisions that served his interests while believing they were exercising free will. They competed against each other for his attention and approval while thinking they were pursuing their own careers. They protected and advanced his reputation while convinced they were simply recognizing obvious talent and character. As Marcus walked home that evening, he reflected on how far he had come from the naive young man who had once believed in meritocracy and fair play. That version of himself seemed almost quaint now, like a child who still believed in Santa Claus. The real world was far more interesting and complex than those simple moral frameworks suggested. Power, Marcus had learned, was not about domination or intimidation. Those were the crude tools of obvious predators, easily recognized and eventually defeated. True power was invisible, operating through influence and manipulation so subtle that its targets never realized they were being controlled. It was about becoming indispensable while remaining seemingly humble, about creating dependencies while appearing to offer support, about winning every game while convincing everyone else that no game was being played at all. The rain had started again, turning the city streets into rivers of reflected neon. Marcus pulled his coat tighter and smiled. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to test and refine his understanding of human nature. He was no longer content to simply survive in the world, he was ready to shape it according to his will, one carefully orchestrated interaction at a time. 2 years after his initial awakening, Marcus Kane had transformed from a mid-level consultant into a force of nature within the corporate ecosystem. His office on the 32nd floor overlooked the city he was learning to control, one relationship at a time. The view reminded him daily that while others saw buildings and streets, he saw networks of opportunity and influence waiting to be harvested. The morning started like any other, with Marcus arriving at the office before dawn to review his detailed psychological profiles of everyone in his expanding sphere of influence. These files, disguised as simple contact databases, contained meticulously gathered intelligence, personal insecurities, family dynamics, financial pressures, career aspirations, and, most importantly, emotional triggers that could be activated when necessary. His assistant, Catherine, knocked softly before entering with his coffee and the day's schedule. She was a perfect example of Marcus's evolved methodology. Rather than hiring someone incompetent whom he could easily manipulate, Marcus had deliberately chosen the most capable candidate. Catherine was brilliant, organized, and ambitious, qualities that made her infinitely more valuable as an ally than a pawn. "The board meeting has been moved to 10:30, Catherine informed him, her tone professional but warm. "And David Richardson called 3 times yesterday evening. He seems anxious about something." Marcus nodded thoughtfully, already knowing exactly what was troubling David. 3 weeks earlier, Marcus had carefully orchestrated a situation where David would discover a minor financial discrepancy in his department's budget. The discrepancy was harmless, a simple accounting error that happened regularly throughout the company, but Marcus had ensured that David found it in a way that made him feel responsible and paranoid about potential consequences. Schedule lunch with David for today, Marcus instructed. Somewhere private. He needs guidance, and we don't want him making any rash decisions that could hurt his career. Catherine made the note, unaware that she was participating in a carefully choreographed psychological campaign. David's anxiety would make him extremely receptive to Marcus's influence, and the private lunch would position Marcus as both confidant and savior. By the end of their meal, David would owe Marcus a significant favor while believing that Marcus had simply been a good friend during a difficult time. The board meeting itself presented a different type of opportunity. Marcus had spent months studying the dynamics between the senior executives, mapping their alliances, rivalries, and hidden agendas. Today's discussion about the company's expansion into Asian markets would provide the perfect testing ground for his most ambitious manipulation yet. As the executives filed into the conference room, Marcus observed their body language and seating choices with the attention of an anthropologist studying a primitive tribe. CEO Harrison Blake took his customary position at the head of the table, radiating the kind of confidence that came from never having been truly challenged. CFO Patricia Wong sat to his right, her laptop already open, armor of spreadsheets and financial projections protecting her from any emotional appeal. Marketing Director James Foster chose a seat that gave him clear sightlines to everyone else, a man who understood the importance of reading the room but lacked the sophistication to actually control it. Before we dive into the Asian expansion proposal, Marcus began, his voice carrying just the right mixture of deference and authority. I'd like to share some insights from my recent conversations with our field teams. This was Marcus's opening gambit. He had indeed spoken with field teams, but, more importantly, he had spent weeks planting specific concerns and observations in their minds through careful questioning and strategic information sharing. The insights he was about to present were actually his own strategic objectives, filtered through the voices of trusted employees and repackaged as grassroots wisdom. What our people are telling me, Marcus continued, making eye contact with each board member in turn, is that they're excited about expansion, but concerned about timing. They're worried we might be rushing into markets we don't fully understand. Marcus watched Patricia Wong's subtle nod of agreement. She had been privately skeptical of the expansion timeline but hesitant to voice her concerns directly. By positioning his opposition as coming from the field rather than from strategic analysis, Marcus was giving her permission to express her doubts while simultaneously validating her expertise. That's interesting, Harrison Blake interjected, his tone suggesting he was anything but interested. What specific concerns are they raising? Marcus had anticipated this question and prepared accordingly. Cultural adaptation issues, regulatory complexities, and, most importantly, resource allocation. They're asking whether we have the internal infrastructure to support rapid expansion without compromising our domestic operations. These were legitimate business concerns, but Marcus's true objective was far more personal. The Asian expansion project was being championed by Victoria Stevens, the ambitious VP who had recently begun positioning herself as Marcus's primary rival for influence within the company. Victoria was intelligent, charismatic, and politically astute, exactly the type of competitor who could derail Marcus's long-term plans if not handled carefully. The beauty of Marcus's approach was its apparent reasonableness. He wasn't attacking Victoria directly or undermining her proposal through obvious sabotage. Instead, he was introducing doubt and complexity into what should have been a straightforward discussion. Every question he raised was legitimate, every concern was valid, and every suggestion was framed in terms of helping the company succeed. I think Marcus raises important points, Patricia Wong said, exactly as Marcus had predicted she would. Maybe we should consider a phased approach, starting with market research and pilot programs before committing to full expansion. Marcus suppressed a smile as he watched Victoria's carefully composed expression tighten almost imperceptibly. She knew exactly what was happening but couldn't respond without appearing defensive or dismissive of legitimate business concerns. Marcus had forced her into an impossible position. She could either accept the delays he was proposing, effectively gutting her project, or fight back and risk appearing reckless and unprofessional. Of course, market research is always wise, Victoria replied, her voice steady but her eyes flashing with recognition of the trap Marcus had set. But we also can't let over-analysis prevent us from capitalizing on first-mover advantages in emerging markets. Marcus nodded sagely, as if considering this perspective for the first time. Absolutely, Victoria. Speed to market is crucial. That's why I've been thinking about how we might accelerate our preparation phase. He turned to address the full board. What if we created a cross-functional task force to conduct intensive market analysis over the next 90 days? We could identify the highest potential markets, develop localized strategies, and create implementation timelines that balance speed with security. It was a masterful countermove. Marcus had taken Victoria's urgency argument and used it to justify an even more comprehensive planning process. The task force idea appeared collaborative and thorough while actually serving Marcus's true purpose, inserting himself directly into Victoria's project as a key stakeholder and decision-maker. I like that approach, Harrison Blake said, his enthusiasm genuine. Victoria, would you be willing to co-chair this task force with Marcus? Between your market expertise and his operational insights, we could develop something really robust. Marcus watched Victoria's face carefully as she processed this development. She understood that accepting would mean sharing control of her project with her primary rival, but refusing would seem petty and uncooperative. Marcus had engineered a perfect win-win scenario. Either Victoria would be forced to collaborate with him directly, giving him unprecedented access to undermine her efforts from within, or she would reject the collaboration and damage her reputation for being difficult to work with. I'd be honored to work with Marcus on this, Victoria said finally, her smile professional but her handshake with Marcus slightly firmer than necessary. I'm sure we'll develop something exceptional together. As the meeting concluded and the executives filed out, Marcus lingered to chat casually with Patricia Wong about budget projections for the task force. This apparently innocent conversation served multiple purposes. It established Marcus as detail-oriented and fiscally responsible, it created a private communication channel with the CFO, and it demonstrated to Victoria that Marcus already had allies among the senior leadership. The lunch with David Richardson took place at a small, exclusive restaurant downtown, the kind of place where conversations couldn't be overheard and the atmosphere encouraged intimate confession. Marcus had chosen the location carefully, knowing that David's anxiety would be heightened by the formal setting but also impressed by Marcus's obvious influence in securing a same-day reservation at such an exclusive venue. I don't know what to do, Marcus, David said, his usual confidence replaced by visible worry. I keep thinking about that budget discrepancy. What if there are other problems I haven't noticed? What if someone thinks I'm incompetent? Marcus leaned forward, his expression radiating concern and empathy. David, you're one of the most thorough managers in the company. A minor accounting error doesn't change that. He paused, allowing his words to sink in. But I understand why you're worried. In today's environment, even small mistakes can be blown out of proportion if the wrong person notices them. This was classic Marcus's validation followed by subtle fear amplification. David's relief at being reassured would make him even more receptive to the anxiety that followed. Marcus was simultaneously positioning himself as David's emotional support and as his only protection against potential career consequences. The thing is, Marcus continued, his voice dropping to a confidential whisper, I've been hearing rumors about increased scrutiny from the executive committee. Nothing specific, just general talk about accountability and performance metrics. This was entirely fabricated, but David had no way to verify the information without revealing his own insecurities. What kind of scrutiny? David asked, his voice tight with apprehension. Marcus shook his head as if reluctant to continue. I probably shouldn't say anything. I don't want to make you more worried than you already are. Please, Marcus. I need to know what I'm dealing with. The request was exactly what Marcus had been waiting for. By making David explicitly ask for the information, Marcus was ensuring that the subsequent manipulation would be received as helpful guidance rather than unsolicited interference. From what I'm hearing, Marcus said, his reluctance obviously fake but convincing to David's anxious mind, there's going to be increased focus on departmental efficiency and financial management. The board wants detailed reports on budget utilization and cost-effectiveness metrics. None of this was true, but Marcus knew that David would never directly verify the information with senior management. Doing so would require admitting his own concerns and potentially drawing unwanted attention to his department. "What should I do?" David asked, his desperation now obvious. Marcus appeared to consider this carefully, as if weighing David's best interests against potential risks to himself. "I have an idea, but it would require absolute discretion. I could quietly review your departmental processes and help you identify any potential issues before they become problems. Unofficially, of course, just as a friend looking out for your career." David's relief was palpable. "Would you really do that? I know how busy you are with your own responsibilities." "We look out for each other," Marcus replied with warm sincerity. "That's what friends do." As they shook hands outside the restaurant, Marcus knew he had achieved his objective. David now owed him a massive favor, would provide Marcus with complete access to his departmental operations, and would be psychologically dependent on Marcus's approval for the foreseeable future. Even better, David believed that Marcus had sacrificed his own time and taken personal risks to help a friend in need. The afternoon was spent in Marcus's office, reviewing intelligence reports disguised as routine administrative documents. Catherine brought in the quarterly performance reviews, personnel files for potential new hires, and budget allocations for the upcoming year. To anyone observing casually, Marcus appeared to be doing routine managerial work. In reality, he was analyzing power structures, identifying leverage points, and planning his next moves in an increasingly complex game of corporate chess. The personnel files were particularly interesting. Marcus had specifically requested to review all candidates for senior positions, ostensibly to provide input on cultural fit and team dynamics. His real purpose was to ensure that only people he could influence or control would be hired into positions of importance. The review process gave him legitimate reasons to investigate each candidate's background, personality profile, and potential vulnerabilities. One file immediately caught his attention. Sarah Chen, a brilliant strategist with an MBA from Wharton and 5 years of experience at a top consulting firm. Her qualifications were impeccable, her references glowing, and her interview scores the highest in the company's recent history. She was exactly the type of person who could accelerate her career rapidly and potentially challenge Marcus's growing influence. Marcus made a note to schedule a personal interview with Sarah, ostensibly as part of the comprehensive evaluation process. He would need to determine whether she could be recruited as an ally or whether she represented a threat that needed to be neutralized before she ever joined the company. The late afternoon brought an unexpected visitor. Victoria Stevens appeared at Marcus's office door, her smile friendly but her eyes calculating. "Do you have a few minutes to discuss our task force collaboration?" she asked, settling into the chair across from his desk without waiting for an invitation. Marcus studied her carefully. Victoria was one of the few people in the company who seemed to recognize the game being played, even if she didn't fully understand the rules. This conversation would be a delicate dance between two predators, each trying to assess the other's capabilities and intentions without revealing their own strategies. "I'm looking forward to working together," Marcus replied neutrally. "Your expertise in international markets will be invaluable. And your talent for building consensus will be equally important," Victoria responded, her tone matching his diplomatic caution. "I've been impressed by how smoothly you've navigated some of the company's more complex personalities." The comment was carefully chosen. Victoria was acknowledging Marcus's political skills while simultaneously probing to see how much he would reveal about his methods. Marcus recognized the trap and appreciated its sophistication. "I think people respond well when they feel heard and understood," Marcus said, offering a platitude that revealed nothing while maintaining his image as someone who succeeded through emotional intelligence rather than manipulation. "Absolutely," Victoria agreed. "Understanding what motivates people is crucial for effective leadership." She paused, studying Marcus's face. "I'm curious about your thoughts on timeline for the task force. 90 days seems ambitious given the scope of analysis we'll need to conduct." Marcus had been expecting this question. Victoria was testing whether he was genuinely interested in thorough market research or simply trying to delay her expansion project. His response would need to demonstrate commitment to the project while maintaining his leverage over the timeline. "You're right that 90 days is aggressive," Marcus admitted. "But I think it's achievable if we structure the work effectively. We could divide the analysis into regional phases, starting with the markets that show the highest immediate potential." He leaned forward, projecting collaborative enthusiasm. "What if we aimed for preliminary recommendations at the 60-day mark, with detailed implementation plans by day 90? Victoria nodded slowly, apparently satisfied with his response. "That could work. I'll start pulling together demographic and economic data for the priority markets." "Can you handle the operational feasibility analysis?" "Of course," Marcus replied. "I'll coordinate with David Richardson's team for the financial modeling, and Catherine can help organize the logistics." As Victoria left his office, Marcus reflected on the conversation. She had revealed several important things. She was serious about the expansion project and wouldn't be easily deterred. She suspected that Marcus had ulterior motives but couldn't prove anything, and, most importantly, she was willing to work within the collaborative framework rather than fighting it directly. This suggested that Victoria was playing a longer game, perhaps hoping to use the task force as an opportunity to study Marcus's methods while advancing her own agenda. The evening brought Marcus to his usual networking event, a weekly gathering of young professionals at an upscale downtown bar. These events were invaluable for maintaining his broader network of contacts and identifying potential future opportunities. Marcus had learned that influence required constant cultivation across multiple environments and social circles. Tonight's gathering included several familiar faces from other companies, a few recent MBA graduates looking for their first big break, and some established executives who enjoyed mentoring younger professionals. Marcus moved through the crowd like a social scientist, engaging in conversations that appeared casual but were actually carefully structured information-gathering sessions. He spent several minutes talking with Amanda Torres, a marketing director at a competing firm who had recently been promoted. Marcus congratulated her enthusiastically while probing for details about her new responsibilities and the internal dynamics at her company. Amanda was flattered by his attention and eager to share her success story, unwittingly providing Marcus with valuable intelligence about her firm's strategic priorities and potential vulnerabilities. Later, Marcus encountered Robert Kim, a recent Harvard MBA who was struggling to find his footing at a prestigious investment bank. Robert was clearly overwhelmed by the competitive environment and looking for guidance from someone who appeared to have navigated similar challenges successfully. "The thing that's killing me," Robert confessed over expensive whiskey, "is that I can never tell what people really want. Everyone speaks in code, and I feel like I'm constantly missing the subtext." Marcus nodded sympathetically, recognizing a perfect opportunity to plant seeds for future cultivation. Corporate communication is definitely an art form. The key is learning to listen for what people don't say rather than focusing only on their words. He spent the next 20 minutes giving Robert genuinely helpful advice about reading office politics and understanding hidden agendas. The guidance was accurate and would actually help Robert succeed in his current role, but it also served Marcus's longer-term interests. Robert would remember this conversation as a moment when Marcus had provided crucial career guidance, creating a debt of gratitude that could be leveraged years later when Robert had advanced to a more influential position. As the evening wound down, Marcus reflected on the day's achievements. He had successfully inserted himself into Victoria's expansion project, secured David Richardson's complete loyalty and cooperation, identified a potential new hire who would require careful management, and expanded his network with 2 new contacts who could provide future value. But, perhaps most importantly, Marcus had begun to recognize patterns in his own development. The naive consultant who had discovered his true nature 2 years earlier was evolving into something far more sophisticated. He was no longer simply manipulating individual relationships or pursuing short-term advantages. Instead, he was constructing an entire ecosystem of influence that would allow him to shape events and control outcomes across multiple organizations and industries. Standing on his apartment balcony that night, looking out over the city lights, Marcus felt the familiar surge of satisfaction that came from a day well spent in the pursuit of power. But, tonight, there was something more, a growing awareness that his ambitions had expanded far beyond mere corporate success. Marcus was beginning to understand that true power didn't come from climbing existing hierarchies, but from creating new ones. The game he was learning to play wasn't just about advancing his career within one company, but about positioning himself to influence entire industries and shape the career trajectories of dozens, eventually hundreds, of other professionals. The city sprawled below him, millions of people going about their lives according to patterns they didn't understand, following rules they hadn't chosen, pursuing goals that had been subtly programmed into them by invisible forces. Marcus was learning to become one of those forces, to operate at the level of systems and structures rather than just individual relationships. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities. The task force with Victoria would require careful navigation, the situation with David would need delicate management, and the potential hiring of Sarah Chen would demand strategic thinking about long-term power dynamics. But Marcus felt ready for these challenges because he was finally beginning to understand the true scope of the game he was playing. He was not just surviving in a world of predators and prey, he was evolving into something beyond both categories. He was becoming an architect of the very systems that determined who would hunt and who would be hunted, who would rise and who would fall, who would shape the future and who would simply react to changes they could never understand or control. The night air was cool against his skin as Marcus turned away from the balcony and began planning for tomorrow's conquests. 5 years had transformed Marcus Kane from an ambitious consultant into something unprecedented, a shadow emperor whose influence stretched across industries, companies, and continents. His corner office in the newly constructed headquarters building served as the nerve center of an invisible empire built not on traditional power structures, but on the careful cultivation of human psychology and the strategic deployment of social influence. The morning sun streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows as Marcus reviewed what he privately called his influence map, a complex digital network showing the interconnected relationships between hundreds of professionals across dozens of organizations. Each node represented a person whose career, decisions, or access he could influence. The connections between nodes showed the flow of information, resources, and obligations that he had carefully orchestrated over the years. Catherine, now promoted to Director of Strategic Operations, entered with his daily briefings. Her evolution from assistant to trusted lieutenant demonstrated Marcus's ability to develop talent while ensuring absolute loyalty. Catherine had become instrumental to his operations, managing the intricate logistics of maintaining relationships across his expanding network while believing she was simply helping an exceptionally gifted executive manage his professional responsibilities. The Chen situation has developed as you predicted, Catherine reported, referring to Sarah Chen, who had indeed been hired 5 years earlier and was now a rising star at a competing firm. She's been selected for their executive development program and will likely be promoted to VP within the next 18 months. Marcus nodded, unsurprised by this development. He had orchestrated Sarah's recruitment by their competitor after determining that she was too intelligent and ambitious to be safely contained within his own organization. Instead of viewing her as a threat to be eliminated, Marcus had recognized her as a long-term asset to be positioned strategically. Over the years, he had maintained a carefully calibrated relationship with Sarah, positioning himself as an industry mentor and thought leader whose advice she sought and valued. Schedule lunch with her next week, Marcus instructed. It's time to begin the transition phase. Catherine made the note without asking for clarification. She had learned that Marcus's strategic thinking operated on timelines that often stretched years into the future, and that questioning his decisions was less productive than simply executing them with precision. The transition phase Catherine referenced was part of Marcus's most ambitious project yet, the systematic placement of his protégés and allies into key positions across the industry's major players. Sarah Chen would soon be offered a position that Marcus had been arranging for months, a role that would give her significant influence over industry standards and regulatory compliance. She would accept the position believing it represented recognition of her exceptional capabilities, never realizing that her new role had been designed specifically to advance Marcus's broader strategic objectives. The morning's first meeting was with the Asian Expansion Task Force, which had become far more than the delaying tactic Marcus had originally intended. Over the past year, the project had evolved into a genuine strategic initiative that was generating substantial profits for the company while simultaneously creating a network of international relationships that Marcus could leverage for his personal agenda. Victoria Stevens sat across the conference table, her expression professionally neutral but her eyes alert with the careful attention of someone who had learned to read between the lines of Marcus's presentations. The past year of collaboration had been a fascinating dance between two sophisticated players, each trying to advance their own interests while working within the framework of apparent cooperation. Our preliminary market penetration in Southeast Asia has exceeded projections by 38%, Victoria reported, her tone indicating satisfaction with results that Marcus knew she suspected he had manipulated. The localization strategies Marcus developed have been particularly effective in Singapore and Malaysia. Marcus accepted the praise with appropriate humility while internally cataloging this moment as another step in a much larger plan. The success of the Asian expansion had indeed exceeded all expectations, but not because of superior strategy or market analysis. Marcus had achieved these results by leveraging relationships with local business leaders whom he had been cultivating through industry conferences and networking events for over 3 years. The key breakthrough had come through his friendship with David Tanaka, a prominent Singapore businessman whom Marcus had met at a Harvard alumni event. David had initially been nothing more than a networking contact, but Marcus had invested considerable time and effort in developing genuine rapport with him. Their relationship had evolved from professional courtesy to personal friendship, with Marcus serving as David's informal advisor on American business practices while David provided insights into Southeast Asian market dynamics. What David didn't realize was that Marcus had orchestrated their entire relationship from the beginning. Marcus had researched David extensively before their first meeting, identifying his personal interests, business challenges, and psychological profile. Every conversation, every piece of advice, every moment of apparent friendship had been calculated to create dependency and obligation. When the company had finally entered the Southeast Asian market, David had been eager to facilitate partnerships and introductions, believing he was helping a trusted friend succeed while advancing his own business interests. The remarkable success of their market penetration was actually the result of David's extensive local network opening doors that would normally have taken years to access. I think the success in Southeast Asia validates our approach, Marcus said, addressing the full task force. But I'm concerned that we might be moving too quickly to capitalize on these early wins. Sustainable growth requires careful attention to infrastructure and relationship management. This statement served multiple purposes. It positioned Marcus as thoughtful and cautious rather than aggressive and opportunistic. It also introduced the concept of slowing down expansion just as Victoria was becoming excited about accelerating it. Most importantly, it established the framework for Marcus's next move, a proposal that would dramatically expand his personal influence while appearing to serve the company's best interests. "What kind of infrastructure concerns are you thinking about?" asked James Foster, the marketing director who had become one of Marcus's most reliable allies without ever realizing he was being managed. Marcus had anticipated this question and prepared accordingly. "Relationship management, primarily. We've succeeded in Southeast Asia because we've had excellent local partnerships. If we want to expand into new markets, we need to ensure we have similar relationship networks in place before we commit significant resources." Victoria's expression sharpened slightly. She was beginning to recognize the direction of Marcus's argument and was already calculating how to respond. "That's a valid concern," Victoria said carefully. "But we also need to balance relationship building with speed to market. Our competitors won't wait for us to develop perfect partnerships before making their own moves." Marcus nodded thoughtfully, as if weighing this perspective. "Absolutely. Which is why I've been thinking about a solution that addresses both concerns." He paused for effect, letting the room's attention focus on him completely. "What if we created a dedicated international relationship development division? A small, agile team focused exclusively on building strategic partnerships in target markets before we commit to major expansion initiatives." The proposal was audacious in its scope and brilliant in its misdirection. Marcus was essentially suggesting the creation of his own international influence network, funded by the company and legitimized by corporate structure. The division would give him reasons to travel extensively, meet with business leaders across multiple countries, and build relationships that would serve his personal agenda for decades to come. "That's an interesting idea," Harrison Blake said, his enthusiasm obvious. "How do you envision this division operating?" Marcus had spent weeks preparing for this question, developing a detailed proposal that would appear thoroughly professional while actually serving his personal objectives. I think we'd want a small team of senior-level relationship managers, each with expertise in specific regional markets. Their focus would be on building long-term partnerships rather than immediate transaction opportunities. He continued outlining his vision, describing reporting structures, budget requirements, and success metrics that sounded reasonable but were actually designed to give him maximum autonomy and minimum oversight. The division would report directly to the executive committee, ostensibly to ensure high-level strategic alignment but actually to avoid day-to-day management interference. Victoria listened to the presentation with growing recognition of its implications. If Marcus's proposal were accepted, he would essentially become the company's international relationship czar, with legitimate reasons to build networks across multiple countries and industries. It was an extraordinarily ambitious power grab disguised as strategic corporate development. I think this could be exactly what we need, Patricia Wong said, her support carrying significant weight with the other executives. Marcus had spent months positioning himself as Patricia's trusted advisor on international financial management, and her endorsement was the result of that careful cultivation. Marcus, would you be willing to lead this division yourself? Harrison Blake asked. I can't think of anyone with better qualifications for this kind of relationship-building work. Marcus appeared to consider this request carefully, as if weighing the personal sacrifice against corporate benefit. It would be a significant commitment, and I'd need to step back from some of my current responsibilities. But, if the committee believes this is where I can add the most value, I'm willing to take on the challenge. Victoria's face remained professionally composed, but Marcus could see the calculation behind her eyes. She understood that she had just witnessed a masterful corporate coup, executed with such apparent reasonableness that opposing it would seem petty and short-sighted. The meeting concluded with unanimous approval for Marcus's proposal, pending detailed budget and structural planning. As the executives filed out, Victoria lingered behind. Congratulations, she said, her smile genuine despite the competitive undertones. You've managed to create your ideal job while making it seem like you're sacrificing for the company's benefit. Marcus studied her face, recognizing both admiration and wariness in her expression. Victoria was acknowledging his skill while simultaneously serving notice that she understood exactly what had just happened. I appreciate the recognition, Marcus replied neutrally. Though I hope you don't think this was about personal advancement. The company's international growth really does require better relationship infrastructure. Victoria laughed, a sound that contained no humor. Marcus, I've been watching you operate for over a year now. You're incredibly talented at making your personal interests align perfectly with corporate objectives. It's actually quite impressive, in a terrifying sort of way. The conversation was approaching dangerous territory. Victoria was coming closer to explicitly acknowledging the game they were both playing, which would force Marcus to either reveal more of his methods or take steps to neutralize her as a threat. I think we both want the company to succeed, Marcus said, maintaining his diplomatic tone. Sometimes that requires taking on responsibilities that aren't necessarily comfortable or convenient. Of course, Victoria agreed, her tone matching his careful neutrality. I'm sure your new role will be tremendously successful. And I look forward to seeing how your relationship-building expertise translates to the international arena. As Victoria left his office, Marcus recognized that their dynamic had fundamentally shifted. She was no longer simply a competitive colleague but a potential adversary who understood his methods well enough to potentially interfere with his plans. This development would require careful consideration and strategic response. The afternoon brought a series of one-on-one meetings with key members of his expanding network. First was David Richardson, who had evolved from an anxious department manager into one of Marcus's most valuable internal allies. David now controlled significant budget allocations and personnel decisions, power that he wielded according to Marcus's subtle guidance while believing he was simply following sound business principles. The International Relationship Development Division sounds fascinating, David said, his enthusiasm genuine. I assume you'll need dedicated financial tracking and reporting systems for the international partnerships? Marcus nodded approvingly. David had immediately recognized the budgetary implications of the new division and was already positioning himself to play a crucial role in its operations. This was exactly the kind of strategic thinking that Marcus had been cultivating in David over the years. Absolutely. The financial management will be complex, especially when we're dealing with multiple currencies and regulatory environments, Marcus replied. I was hoping you might be willing to lead the financial infrastructure development for the division. David's face lit up with the satisfaction of someone whose expertise was being recognized and valued. I'd be honored to take that on. It sounds like exactly the kind of challenging project I've been looking for. What David didn't realize was that leading the financial infrastructure for Marcus's new division would give him access to budgets and international transactions that could be leveraged for purposes far beyond legitimate business development. Marcus was essentially recruiting David to manage the financial aspects of his personal influence network while David believed he was advancing his corporate career. The next meeting was with Jennifer Williams, who had grown from an insecure team member into a competent manager who nonetheless remained psychologically dependent on Marcus's approval and guidance. Jennifer now oversaw several important client relationships and had developed a reputation for exceptional customer satisfaction rates. I've been thinking about what you said last month regarding the importance of international experience, Jennifer said, her tone hopeful. With your new division, do you think there might be opportunities for cross-functional collaboration? Marcus had indeed planted the idea that international experience would be crucial for Jennifer's continued advancement, knowing that she would eventually ask exactly this question. I think there could be excellent opportunities for collaboration. Your client management skills would be invaluable for building relationships with international partners. Jennifer's relief was obvious. Marcus had just offered her the international experience she believed was essential for her career growth while actually recruiting her to help manage his overseas network. She would approach the work with dedication and skill, never realizing that she was helping to build Marcus's personal empire rather than simply advancing company objectives. The final meeting of the day was with Catherine, who had become far more than an assistant or even a director. Catherine now served as Marcus's primary operational coordinator, managing the complex logistics of his influence network while maintaining the appearance of routine corporate administration. The preliminary framework for the international division is already generating interest from our overseas contacts, Catherine reported. I've had inquiries from Singapore, Hong Kong, and several European markets about potential partnership discussions. Marcus was unsurprised by this development. He had spent years seeding these contacts with information about the company's international ambitions, carefully building anticipation for exactly this type of formal expansion. The inquiries Catherine mentioned were actually the result of relationships he had been cultivating for years, now reaching fruition at precisely the right moment. Schedule preliminary discussions with Singapore and Hong Kong for next month, Marcus instructed. And begin developing travel schedules for the second quarter. I want to spend significant time in each target market, building relationships and understanding local dynamics. Catherine nodded, making detailed notes about travel arrangements and meeting logistics. What she was actually planning was Marcus's first formal tour as the head of his international influence network, disguised as routine business development. That evening, Marcus hosted a dinner party at his upscale apartment for a carefully selected group of local business leaders, industry analysts, and rising professionals. These gatherings had become legendary in certain circles for their guest lists and the quality of conversation, but their true purpose was far more calculating. Among tonight's guests was Robert Kim, the former investment banking analyst who had become a successful portfolio manager largely thanks to guidance he had received from Marcus years earlier. Robert now controlled hundreds of millions in investment capital and had become one of Marcus's most valuable external assets. Also present was Amanda Torres, who had risen to become chief marketing officer at her firm and now influenced industry marketing standards and practices. Amanda's career trajectory had been subtly guided by Marcus through years of strategic advice and networking introductions, though she remained unaware of the extent of his influence over her success. The evening's conversation naturally turned to the topic of international business development, with Marcus sharing carefully selected insights about emerging market opportunities and cross-cultural relationship building. His comments were received as expert analysis by professionals who respected his track record of success, but they were actually intelligence-gathering sessions and influence operations disguised as social conversation. The thing most American companies fail to understand, Marcus said, addressing the group while apparently sharing casual observations, is that business relationships in Asia are built over years, not months. Success requires genuine cultural appreciation and long-term commitment to partnership development. The comments served multiple purposes. It positioned Marcus as an expert on international business development, validated his company's decision to create the International Relationship Development Division, and planted the idea that rapid market entry strategies were doomed to failure. Several guests nodded approvingly, already beginning to internalize this perspective into their own professional thinking. Later in the evening, Marcus found himself in conversation with Dr. Elizabeth Chan, a prominent business school professor who wrote influential articles about corporate strategy and international development. Dr. Chen was someone Marcus had been cultivating for over 2 years, positioning himself as a practitioner whose real-world experience could inform her academic research. "Your approach to international relationship building is fascinating," Dr. Chen said. "I've been incorporating some of your insights into my research on cross-cultural business development. Would you be interested in co-authoring an article for the Harvard Business Review?" Marcus appeared genuinely surprised and flattered by the offer, though he had been maneuvering toward exactly this opportunity for months. "I'd be honored to collaborate with you, Dr. Chen. Though I hope you don't think my practical experience is sophisticated enough for academic publication." The false modesty was perfectly calibrated. Dr. Chen immediately reassured Marcus about the value of his insights while reinforcing her own desire for collaboration. Within minutes, they had agreed to co-author a major article that would establish Marcus as a thought leader in international business development while providing academic legitimacy for his methods. As the evening wound down and guests began to leave, Marcus reflected on the day's achievements. He had successfully created a corporate division that would serve as a front for his international influence operations. He had recruited key allies to manage the financial and operational aspects of his expansion. He had begun positioning himself as an academic thought leader whose theories would influence how other companies approached international development. But, perhaps most importantly, Marcus had achieved these goals while maintaining the appearance of exceptional corporate citizenship and strategic thinking. Every move appeared motivated by company loyalty and business acumen rather than personal ambition and power accumulation. Standing on his balcony late that night, Marcus contemplated the scope of what he had built and what he was planning to build. His influence network now included people in positions of power across multiple industries and countries. His methods had evolved from simple psychological manipulation to sophisticated systems thinking and strategic architecture. The naive consultant who had first recognized his predatory nature 5 years earlier would barely recognize the person he had become. Marcus was no longer simply someone who succeeded within existing power structures, he had become someone who created and controlled power structures themselves. The city sprawled below him, millions of lights representing millions of people living according to patterns and pursuing goals they believed they had chosen freely. Marcus understood now that true power wasn't about dominating these people or even manipulating them directly. True power was about designing the systems within which they made their choices, creating the frameworks that determined what options were available and which paths seemed most attractive. Tomorrow would bring new challenges as he began implementing his international expansion. There would be complex negotiations with foreign partners, delicate cultural dynamics to navigate, and sophisticated professionals to recruit or neutralize. But Marcus felt ready for these challenges because he had finally understood the true scope of the game he was playing. He was not merely a successful professional or even a master manipulator. Marcus had evolved into something unprecedented, an architect of influence who operated at the level of industries and societies rather than just individuals and organizations. He was creating systems that would shape human behavior and determine social outcomes for generations to come. The cool night air carried the sounds of the city, traffic, conversations, the distant hum of economic activity that never truly stopped. Marcus listened to these sounds with the satisfaction of someone who understood that he was becoming one of the forces that determined their rhythm and direction. The game was no longer about personal success or even corporate advancement. Marcus was playing for something far more ambitious, the power to shape the fundamental structures of human civilization itself, one carefully cultivated relationship at a time.